Hey, get 'em! Doc Joe here from Storyweaver Games with another Slaughter update and a little mini tutorial for Photoshop buffs. Now, we're currently in the process of creating some additional cards for the box set of Slaughter. In fact, this will be for all of the decks of cards for Slaughter. And these are a concept of a monster card that would have a QR code on them so that when a director is in game and they quickly need to come up with a monster, they can grab the monster card, snap it with their phone, and that would take them to effectively a mobile ready website where they could quickly look at the monster, get some ideas about how to direct that monster, and then see a whole bunch of recommended prop and special effects cards that would be used to create that particular monster for their horror movie. So that sounded like a really good idea, and we started building that. And I started getting to creating a sample web page to see how that would work last night. And suddenly I was realizing that I was having to manually create copies, web-ready copies of all of the cards, and it was really slowing me down. So, and take a look at this. I mean, we have got literally hundreds of potential cards for our monsters. And that's just one deck. There's a lot of cards in a deck. And to manually take each of these cards and make them web ready with the lovely little curved edges so that they look like a card as opposed to the big, as you can see here, just hard edges, and put some nice little edging on them and a bit of a drop shadow was a bit of a Photoshop, it's a bit of a Photoshop journey. I've been doing that in the past by creating layered Photoshop files and bringing in the cards as we go. But it was a manual process and it was just getting really bogging me down. So I thought, let's animate this. Let's make this automated so that we can do this really quickly. Now, the folder that you see here are actually outputs of the cards. So what we did is we created the offset printing files in obviously Adobe, and then we have exported those from InDesign to an Adobe file, and then from that Adobe file we have exported them further into basically images. And we need to take each of those images and process them now. So I'm going to guide you through how to do that. So if you're a Photoshop buff, this will be really exciting for you. If you're a game designer, this is a good way of making sample cards for your websites. And if you're just interested in how we do things in Storyweaver and how we're making stuff for Slaughter, hey, great, watch along. So I'm going to come to Photoshop now, and we're going to use something called an automation. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a bunch of these cards. I'm going to zoom in a little bit by holding down the control key, and let's not make them too many cards. And I'm going to get them so that they're roughly horizontal, and then I'm going to take this list again. Almost. I just want them as two columns. And let's come down here, and for this demo, we'll just use all of these cards here. So I'm going to use a mouse to scroll all the way down and just mark all of the cards, these outputted files, these raw outputted files, and I'm going to drag them into Photoshop. That's the first thing that we're going to do. So now we're going to have a squillion of these little cards. I can now minimize that for the moment. And you can see they're all coming in. I forgot to delete that because that was one of my prototype scripts. There we go. So we're all ready. You come to the actions script. If you're not familiar with actions, you'll find them over here in your toolbar, or you can go to Windows and find the actions button like so and bring up that window. I have created a folder by clicking on this button here, and I've called it Doc Joe Sweeney so I know where all of my scripts are located. Now, let's start by creating a script that will turn this into a beautifully formatted web card. In fact, not just one formatted web card, but 4. Yes, you get 4 for the price of 1. We're going to do 4 different cards, and let me now bring up where we're going to put those. So I'm going to go up a layer here through my various Slaughter decks, and I'm going to go to the marketing folder, and I believe I've got individual cards samples for PNG. And we've got sample cards folder in there. This is where I'm going to store my 4 different types of cards. We're going to have a large card, which will have a lovely shadowing effect on it. That's for high resolution web images or maybe some social media. We're going to have one without a shadow, which will be for flat backgrounds, using it maybe in other Photoshop projects. A small card, which is really what I want, and that will be the card that I'll be using on this mobile first little application that will show the monsters. And then small one without shadows, because we may as well capture this one as well. And when we run this script, the script is going to grab all of the information from here, format it, and then save off different versions into each of those folders. So, and save us a bucket load of work. So let's see how we actually create this. So the first thing we need to do is start creating our new script. And you do that by pushing this little button here, create new action script. We're going to give it a name, and I'm going to say multi sample cards from 3.5 by, oops, actually that's 2.5 by 3.5 inch outputs. So we know that this is the raw output. We might put the word raw there so that we know that what we're talking about. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to hit the record button, and this is going to be recording. Beep. Okay, so now that we've got this and it's recording, the little red button is here. We're going to minimize this so we keep it out of the way. The first thing we're going to do is unlock the current layer, because that's the background layer. If we don't unlock it, we can't move it around. You'll see why that's important later. So we unlock it. The next thing we do is grab this tool here, which is the rounded rectangle tool. If you're not seeing it, then click on there and select it from that list. That's a right click. So click on that. Just draw a rounded rectangle onto the screen, and you can see by default it will be a color. That may differ. Now we're going to go to the properties for that, and where is my properties panel? Window, properties, there. There's my properties panel. Let's just move that up there so we can see it. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that this area is exactly the size of a real playing card, which will be, and you guessed it, it will be 3.5 inches. Make sure you put inches by 2. Oops, I've actually done that around the wrong way. Silly me. 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So we now have got that the right width of a card. The positioning of it will be 0 and 0. So now you can see that's filled the entire surface area of our playing card. And I'm going to click on this color button here, and I'm going to select pitch black. Great. And the last thing we're going to do is set the corners. This is the real thing that we want. We want these lovely edged corners. And I know from previous experience that 40 is the way to go. If you have this lock setting here, all of the corners will turn to 40. And as you can see, that has now worked. You can see a little bit of the purple around the edges there, but we've got that. Now, this is where things get real fun. We're going to take this layer, the base layer, and we're going to drag it above that black layer, that curved black layer. And then we're going to use a function inside Photoshop called clipping mask. Create a clipping mask. And what you've now seen is that the layer below it, that little rectangular area of the curved edges, is now basically like a cutout of the card above it. So you can see we've got these lovely little transparent edges to our card now. The next thing we need to do is make this canvas slightly larger, because what we want to do is put an outline around the side of the card and then a drop shadow. And if we just leave it at this, then the drop shadow is going to get cut by the edge of the image. So we go up here to the image function, and we go canvas size. Very important that it's canvas size. And I know from the offset printing card InDesign files that we're using that we need to add in total 1.25 inches around every single edge of the card for what we call bleed. So we're going to add the same amount of space, which will basically, what we're looking at now is 0.75, because 1.25 times 2 for each edge, you get you can do the math. So we're clicking OK. Now that has left the card in the middle of the image, which is exactly where we want it. So we now have our transparent card. That's looking great, but we want to add these special effects. We want to add that border and the shadow. To do that, you need to come down to that black layer again, and we're going to do a couple of funky things. We're going to right click, go blending options, and the first thing we'll do is add a stroke to it. It's not a heart attack, that is just a regular line around the card, and 2 pixels, which was the default in this particular setting, looks to be about right. And I also would like to have a drop shadow, and let's come down to the drop shadow, and that's pointing in the wrong direction. I'd like it to go in the other direction. Let's make it 130. Now you can see it's pushing off the side there. Opacity about 75%, that's probably good. Distance from the card looks to be about right. 12 pixels, spread is 20, that's fine, and the size is 12. That all looks good for me. I'm going to click on OK. So now we have our large card cut with a beautiful drop shadow. So that's ready to output. So what you do here is you go File, Save As. Now we could do an export, but I'm going to recommend that we actually do a Save As in this particular case because it's going to give us more control and it's going to keep the file name. So we go Save As. Now by default, it's going to save wherever the last card was saved or opened from, and that was our card samples from our layout. However, when we save this, it's going to save with the same file name, and we want to have 4 different versions, so we need to put it into those different folders. So I'm going to come all the way back to my Slaughter base folder here. I'm going to go into my marketing folder. Let's find those individuals. There it is, individual. Go into the sample cards. This one is the large version of it. So we'll go into this folder. You can see that the name is going to be the same. Do change it to a PNG file, transparent PNG file. And we click Save. And it's going to ask us what file size we want for this. Because this is primarily going to be used on websites, I'm going to go for the smallest file size. And I'm going to click on OK. Now that will mean that we'll get a little bit of distortion. There'll be a little bit of quality loss, but it won't be noticeable enough for what we're really doing here. So that's the first version of the card saved. Now we're going to do the second version, and we're just going to turn off the drop shadow. We want to keep the stroke, but we'll turn off the drop shadow. I'm going to go Save As again, and we will need to go all the way back to our marketing folder, to our individual cards, to sample cards, large, no shadow this time. And again, change it to PNG. Let's save it. And it's remembered the smallest file size, so that's good. Click on OK, and we now have that one saved. Now let's do the small card. So to do this, we're going to turn the drop shadow back on, and we're going to go up to here. Now the reason I turn the drop shadow back on is I'm not 100% sure that when a card is shrunk, if it takes all of the settings of that drop shadow and also creates the small size of it as well. Let's take a look and see what happens. So I'm going to go Image, and this time instead of changing canvas size, we're going to click on Image Size, because the image size will compress the entire image. Making sure that this little thing here is checked, that we actually constrain the ratios, we're going to reduce this to maybe, let's say 360 pixels wide. That will be good for the website that we're trying to work on. Not too small, but not too big. Just right, Goldilocks. We're going to also, everything else is right. We click on OK. So now you can see that this screen has made a smaller card. Let's just go and double check those drop shadow settings here. And we can see, yes, they have in fact almost halved with the exception of the spread. So let's knock that spread down to 10. Okay. You can see now it's tighter, and we're going to click on OK. And go back up to our file saving capabilities here. We go File, and then we'll go Save As. And again, all the way back to our marketing folder so that we know where to find these cards. Individuals, sample cards. Now you can imagine having to do this manually for every single card. It will just be a nightmare. So keep in mind, we are recording this. So we go to the small folder, we click on PNG, Save. Again, smallest file size we find for this, and off it's saved. Now let's turn off the drop shadow, and again, you guessed it, we're just going to go File, Save As, go all the way back to our marketing folder and to our individual cards, to samples, and put it in the small node folder, making sure that we do always output as a PNG file. I have, when I was writing the original scripts of this and testing it, I would often forget to do that. So don't do that, because then you have to start your script again and click on it. Fine. Now, the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to close this file without saving it. And the reason for that is we don't need to save the PNG file, the Photoshop files of this. This is just a working file. And by doing it that way, by just closing it off, it immediately means that the next available image that we had loaded will be ready for running the script. So we'll just go File, and then Close. And it's asking if we want to save it. We go Nope. And we're done. Now, let's come back to our action scripts here, and let's stop the script. So now we have this long script running down the page here, which shows all of the actions which I did. We're also now positioned on the next card to print, but let's go and take a look at actually what happened there. So in the large folder, you can see if I click on that, we now have a beautifully formatted large PNG file ready for a website or some other marketing, social marketing or whatever. If we go to the large no shadow, we have the same thing, but look, no shadow. So now it's a flat, lying flat card. Small, and you guessed it, yep, small with a small shadow and so forth. So that's all working good. Now notice in those folders we only had one card. Let's now, using the lycanthrope card, play that action again. In fact, we can just, you can actually close that action down like so. So it's now nice and easy just to see what actions you've got there. Watch this. Boop. Off it going, it's doing all its stuff, it's pretending to be me. It's operating so fast you don't even get to see it. Hoping this works. And it looks like it's finished. Now, if we come back to our folder, and I'm just seeing that samples. Oop. Nope, not that one. Let's go back up one layer, up one layer. There we go. Go to our marketing folder and we take a look at the individual cards. We should now have two cards in here. So if I go to the large folder, you can see we have the lycanthrope card, and it's that easy. So now I can produce four cards, four sample cards with the lovely curved edges and the drop shadows and all those effects, literally just by loading a whole directory of images into Photoshop and then going through and just clicking on it, and off it goes. So it takes a lot of the irk out of the work. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope that has been useful for other game designers, or just of interest to see how we're doing things with Slaughter. We do try and keep things as effective as possible. I also have, if you're into map making, I have a huge set of map making tutorials over on the Storyweaver website. And I do like to share this information. If you've got questions or you're working on a game of your own, feel free to give us a buzz. Always happy to share knowledge and learn from other people as well. If you've not yet backed Slaughter, please do so. It's a great game, and as you can see, we are adding in new things all the time as we get feedback. Cheers, everyone. Bye.